this is Dan Ferrisi. Welcome to AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. We're going to talk today about company culture, which is something that a lot of organizations within the commercial AV industry are talking about. But I want to go beyond just the talking points, go beyond the platitudes, and really get into what company culture means in a ground level way. To get her perspective, we're chatting with Nancy Knowlton, who is President and CEO of Nureva. Once again, welcome to AV Plus, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify. So happy to be joined today by Nancy Knowlton, who is President and CEO of Nureva. Thanks so much for joining me today, Nancy, on the AV Plus podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So we're going to be talking today about company culture, and obviously that's kind of a personal thing for many organizations. There's not a definitive right or wrong answer. We're really going to be more in the realm of opinion here, but as a prominent leader in the commercial AV industry, as the president and CEO of a well-respected and prominent organization within the AV community, I certainly would like to get, at least at the outset, your definition of company culture. It's a phrase that I think people have bandied about an awful lot lately. We don't want it just to be, a platitude or something, though. I want to understand what it means in the real world. So can you give me some concrete notion of company culture, whether it relates to Nureva specifically or just your conceptual idea of it?
Terrific. Thanks for asking the question. I think it is a really hard one. The way that I would start out by answering that question is to say it's really the beating heart of the company. If you cut into us, what is it that we really feel strongly about at the core? And when we talk about the things that we value, we're trying to express what it is that we want our culture to be. So we say that it's based on a foundation of integrity and respect. And so what we're trying to communicate to people inside our organization and outside is that we don't want to compromise on those things. And so we feel very strongly, and we want people who care about those two items as a matter of principle, so that they can spend their time working comfortably in that organization. I think that when a culture is made explicitly, it's a whole lot easier for people to be there, to stay with an organization. So it really is the essence, the manifestation, the beating heart of what a company is and also aspires to be.
So one thing that struck me as fairly interesting when I went to the NSCA BLC this past February was we had a keynote from Denise Leon, who's a branding expert. And she was essentially arguing that people in many cases are chasing after a quote unquote good company culture. But she said there really isn't such a thing as a good company culture. What it is a unique company culture, a company culture that reflects your DNA, your brand, your individuality. She cited, for example, Amazon, which is, of course, much larger than any organization in our industry, but they get sometimes bad press because, they drive too hard, they're so focused on numbers, they push their employees too much. And essentially what she said was, that might not be a good culture for you or your organization or your team members, but that's the right company culture for them. That's their company culture. And it's not wrong, it's unique. Can you talk a little bit about that dichotomy between a good company culture versus a unique company culture? Do you buy into that there isn't really an abstract good? What there is good for you?
Absolutely. Anytime that you use the word good, you're passing judgment on what somebody else is doing. And to be absolutely clear, we actually don't know what it is that is in the back of the executives' minds at Amazon. And in fact, we all kind of know Amazon a little bit, because if they feel they need to make their culture the way that it is, speed and the pursuit of quick, I think we as consumers have loaded that onto them. So they're interpreting their customers' requirements, and that has translated into a company culture. And so I would say that the proposition that good is not where any company wants to be. It is that unique aspect because it's good for them. Nobody sets out to create a bad company culture, but they certainly do want to have a culture that is, I would say, clear and something that people can buy into. You know, if you don't like the cultural values, either because you know them or you think you know them, don't go and work at Amazon. You know, I think that it helps to have such a distinctive culture that, you know, people can say, you know, I think I could operate in that environment or I couldn't. So I do agree. I think unique may not be the only company with the stated culture that it has, because I think if you do look at a lot of companies that, you know, being creative and innovative, responsive to customers, and all of these, you know, general items, I would say that most companies want to have that kind of culture. It's a little bit about how you bring that culture to life that I think brings the distinctiveness to so many companies.
I think that that's exactly right. And, you know, one of the other points she made just on that topic of uniqueness is obviously every brand has a unique logo. They have a unique tagline, something that is their signature, essentially. And she said, if there is this notion of, like, you know, customer centricity or whatever it is that everyone's like, well, that's what I believe in. If everyone has the same or is aiming for the same company culture, isn't that kind of like everyone having the same tagline, everyone having the same logo? Because it's the same mark of distinction in another form, isn't it?
I think it is. And you know, today distinctiveness is so difficult. If you go and take a look at a lot of companies that operate in, let's say, a corporate marketplace, what's the predominant logo color? It's blue.
Mhm.
And if you look at a lot of the shades of blue, they're pretty close to each other. And so that distinctiveness, it's a shade of differentiation. It's not total absolute distinctiveness.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, once you've settled on, or once you've kind of noticed, essentially, if it comes from you know, the team itself, once you've understood what the company culture is, do you feel like it is like more of a top-down kind of a thing where leadership models the culture and those underneath leadership follow their lead? Or do you feel like it's really something that's more like of a groundswell where it's built at the grassroots and it's more something for the executive leadership to kind of notice and cultivate and support rather than to dictate from the top down? Is it the employees' values that determine company culture, or is it the employer's values that determine company culture?
You know, I think it's a combination, and I don't mean to be wishy-washy at all on that. But, you know, when you start a company, it pretty much has to be dictated from the top down. You've got to say, this is what we're doing, because in those very earliest of days, you're trying to attract people who are energized by the mission, vision, and values of the organization, and not just the possibility of stock options that are going to be wildly valuable at some point in the future. You know, I think that people want to align with those organizations. But, you know, as time moves along a little bit, you want, I would say, to bring more of the values and culture to life through the expression from the staff in the company, we've just gone through kind of a values re-energizing process within our company. And it really was an effort to refresh where we had started a number of years ago and get the company team members to really say what they thought was a good way of expressing our company culture moving forward. And we're about to roll out those refreshed values. You know, we didn't start from scratch. We do have a sense of where we are and how we look at the world. And we're refreshing that, and we will make those values public. But it's an interesting combination of where we started with a top-down expression of our values, our culture, now to the point where we've got, I'd say more updated version of those values, because we've lived them, we've felt them, and people buy into those values. So, you know, I don't think that forever and a day your starting values are the ones that you remain with. That's not to say that they're not good, but companies do evolve a little bit. And I think letting new staff members or larger groups of people input into the expression of the culture is a good thing. And for me, that's a progressive development of the company culture.
So on the topic of progressive development of the company culture and letting people in and evolving in that kind of a respect, do you, and I recognize as president and CEO, you're not making necessarily granular decisions about hiring at every level, but do you feel like your hiring managers should try to find people who align with the company culture as it exists? Or do you feel like you should be looking for people who potentially could evolve the company culture in a new direction? Are you looking for someone who fits into the mold of a Nureva employee? Or are you looking for someone who can help reimagine who a Nureva employee could be?
Well, you know, I think it's an interesting combination of that. I think that, you know, you want to make room in an organization for, let's call them square pegs if you've got round holes, because there's value in diversity of perspective and opinion. So I wouldn't say you always want to have sort of like hires, and you know, there's a big place for diversity within an organization, diversity of roles, of ages, of background, education, gender, orientation, whatever. So I like that diversity, but some of the fundamentals around values, you know, so if you say that you have a high level of personal integrity and respect, you certainly do want to have people who behave like that. You know, it's a major red flag if you find an inconsistency in an interview process, you know, an exaggeration of prior work experience or responsibilities or things like that. And so I would hope that our value statements would sort of take us away from hiring an individual like that, because long term there's probably going to be some other things that may be at odds with how we wish to work and how we work together. So, you know, interesting combination. I'd say you largely want people to say, hey, I like this atmosphere where you're inclusive, where you want to hear diversity of opinion, where you want people to be accountable, where I feel I can do my best work. And that's by making your culture and your values explicit. And you don't want people who are just, I would say, going to challenge the status quo just for the sake of challenging the status quo. So interesting combination. If I had to lean, I'd lean more to the side of having people who buy in to the values than I would people who would challenge, because you can waste an awful lot of time and energy on people who just want to come in and change you.
Particularly when you talk about things like ethics and, like misrepresenting experience or something like that. I mean, a diversity of a presentation in that regard certainly would not be a value add to the organization. The reason I'm thinking about these kind of things is I just got back from PSNI Super Summit, and one of the speakers, the keynote speaker, Shane Snow, was talking about the idea of fostering diversity within the team, and particularly diversity of thought. He was saying, and I want to make sure I quote it correctly, 2 heads are better than one only if the 2 heads think differently from each other. Because if they think the same way, then what is the value of having the 2 heads? He was pointing out something, and I want to make sure I get this right too, cognitive entrenchment. And cognitive entrenchment, as he described, essentially is you found a solution to a problem. It's worked well for you, and it has worked so well for you for so long that it almost has become inconceivable to imagine another solution. But if you bring in that other thinker, that other mind, they might, it may not be that you throw away your solution. It may not even be that their solution is better. But when steel strikes steel, both blades sharpen. And all of a sudden you may get to a summit that you otherwise never would have reached. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good way of thinking about things. And, getting productive conflict around ideas and paths forward, I think always yields a better way. Even if you go with your first instinct, your first plan, to challenge that plan and have the plan stand up to legitimate challenge, I think is a good thing. Sometimes, though, it's hard to really have people, particularly, you rise through the ranks and you become, let's say, in my role, like president and CEO, there are some days where I say, could it just go my way? Because it doesn't often. But, then I'll say, well, we're always better if we get more input, and even if it's not my idea, my way forward, because if people are engaged and they're contributing, they're challenging, and we're coming with a better solution, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it's going to be our solution.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the work from home revolution and how that is going to affect company culture. A lot of employees moved during the pandemic from full-time or mostly in person to full-time or mostly remote. Now I'm with Commercial Integrator and I am virtually 100% remote. And a lot of people are primarily working from home at this point. Do you think that is going to be something that causes company culture to wither on the vine? In as much as company culture, it can be somewhat hard, I think, to facilitate it if we're interacting like you and I are on Zoom or on Teams or on Slack. It's not quite the same as being around a water cooler or in the cafeteria in the office, is it?
That's right. I am actually very concerned about this, and I'm very concerned from multiple perspectives. I do think that it's possible to keep productive working relationships in a hybrid or remote mode of working. I am worried about young people and how they develop perspective and knowledge, because there's a certain learning that takes place just by overhearing conversations and by kind of joking around, by being part of a group that goes out for lunch or gets together at the end of the workday. And so as we think about hybrid work or working from home in the future, we've tried to, first of all, say to each of the groups, you really have to find the mode of working that works for your group. And we are going to have a number of teams that will be working more from home than they will from working in the office. And those teams are trying to figure out what type of work works best from home, and where can they benefit from having those casual encounters in the office. You know, I will not discount how important having friends and a collegial working relationship will help people stay with an organization. It's comfortable, it's happy. And, you know, if everything else is aligned, the challenge in the work, the compensation and everything, why would you want to leave? And so, you know, the work from home, if it's strictly work from home, you know, I'm going to say, yes, I think it can work. But is it good on a human level? I'm not so sure. You know, these past 2 years, I've largely worked from home. I've had a couple of days in the office. We had to do video shoots, and I had to have other small errands that could only be done from the office. And so it wasn't really that I was meeting a lot of people. And unlike others, I work with my husband. He's the CTO in our business. So we had each other. But if we had been alone, or I'll say if I had been alone, I think I would have gone a little bit stir crazy. You know, this meeting is nice and productive and everything, but I don't really get a sense of who you are. We can't really share, you know, a joke or two, or I won't see you getting a coffee and ask how your children are. And so that aspect of work, while, you know, it's not specifically work, you're not being productive, but you're creating friendships that do matter, I would say, in today's world. And we shouldn't discount how hybrid or working from home is negatively impacting that side of our lives.
I think that that's a very good point. And there are people who express concerns about feelings of isolation and feelings of just the mundanity of it, where you get up every morning, you go to your home office, at the end of the home office, you walk out, you have dinner, like it almost becomes like an insular environment where you never break out of that little, you know, castle of yours. And it's probably not good for a lot of people's mental health if they don't find ways to break out of that and socialize and get fresh air and just break out of the routine.
Yeah, you bet. And, you know, a lot of people were saying, hey, they developed little routines working from home. You know, a lunch break turned into a walk very often. They connected more with their spouse and with their children. You know, one of the big pluses, I think, for people, and I don't trivialize this at all, is the reduction in the amount of commuting time. That is absolutely huge. And, you know, I live out in the country, and I was commuting one way almost an hour every day. And so I got 2 hours back. And there was a level of, I would say, added value in my life from that. But now I'm looking at balancing my time at home, working from home, and being in the office and connecting with people. I also want to connect in my community. You know, my husband sent me an email last night about a new place that we'll go out for lunch. There are places to go, things to see and experience, and to do them with other people as well. And that is something that I'm really looking forward to.
As I think are a lot of people, that's really what makes life worth living. It's not what's in the house necessarily, although it could well be the people, but it's what you do with those people you care about that is outside of the house. So just to round out the conversation, we've talked about the importance, I think, I'm going to phrase it this way. We want to have cultural cohesion and cultural coherency, but we don't want to have cultural homogeneity. So let's talk a little bit about DEI and inclusion and kind of getting different perspectives in an organization and different life experiences within an organization. Can you talk about some strategies that HR departments can implement that will make sure hiring managers do look for diverse additions to the company's team. Diverse not just in terms of their physical presentation, but also, again, their life experiences, their ideas, their perspectives. They might bring into the boardroom or the project to bring to the project table an entirely different view that is born of who they are. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. You can look at me and kind of tell that I'm a woman of a certain age, and I can tell you way back when I was new to the workforce, and even as my career had moved along a little bit, I actually was pretty young when I started my first company. And the bit about equity and inclusion and diversity, that was not always something that mattered or that was even talked about or considered. And I found a lot of opportunity close to me, and I noticed it. I didn't happen to talk about it a lot or complain about it, because there's nothing worse than somebody who just gratuitously complains. I thought that I would get out there, do my best, and kind of let my work and performance speak for me. And lo and behold, things have improved over the last number of years. And if I look back and compare, there's been a marked improvement. And so as I think about HR functions within organizations, they've certainly got some challenges ahead these days. But I will say that there's more opportunity today to hire diversity without using reverse discrimination. And you might find it surprising that I wouldn't advocate having a target of 50% of women in the company. Our objective is to hire the best available candidate for a role, because I think reverse discrimination actually is not good in a company as well. There are always whispers behind a person's back. Hey, you only got your job because you fit X, Y, Z criteria, and that's not a comfortable feeling for anyone. I think many of our communities have become incredibly diverse. When I moved to Calgary quite a number of years ago, I would have said that it was not a diverse community, and now it very much is. And our hiring reflects in our Calgary community as well as in Ottawa the population base. We're hiring from that diverse community. In an HR function, I would say that hiring really starts with the job definition. And so if you can articulate the skill set that is required, that can give probably some people who are reading that job requirement greater confidence. Hey, I've got that skill. I can do that. I can present myself this way. And so that gives people of all backgrounds and education, I'd say a starting chance to be hired in that role. And the more diversity that you hire and bring into your organization, the more diversity subconsciously you bring in. People get attracted to organizations where they see, maybe not all the same kinds of faces, where they see values and culture expressed in ways where they feel that it will be welcoming to them. And then, of course, in the interview process, where as you're talking about your culture and how you view things, when you overtly speak about a culture of inclusivity. We choose to speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion in that phraseology of inclusivity, because we think that that is the highest level expression where we can make people feel that they could be part of our organization.
Part of that company culture that you're working so hard to build.
Exactly. And then there's one last thing as well. And we have a very, I'd say, hard and fast policy around respectful workplace. And that is our, I would say, commitment to staff that really what we say is inclusive will be inclusive. We're very overt about that. And we want people to feel that if they're being maybe mistreated or whatever in any way, that they've got a way of raising their concerns, where if they've got an honestly held belief that something is not quite right, that they can raise it, of course, and discuss it in a professional and confidential fashion.
Well, kudos to you for that, because I think all too often when people do feel something, as you say, is not quite right, they may feel the potential of being marginalized or ostracized if they voice that concern. And to give people a safe space within which to do so, I think is laudable.
You bet. Hard to do, but we work at it every day.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy, for joining me for this conversation about company culture, how to facilitate it in these very changing and different times. I really appreciate the perspective that you've added.
Well, thank you. And I learned some things from you and from your conference. And so I appreciate that very much as well. Thank you.
So happy to have been joined today by Nancy Knowlton, who is President and CEO of Nureva. My name is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief of Commercial Integrator. Please check back next week for another edition of AV Plus, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. Have a great day.